Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and today we're going to take a look at buying and selling on Facebook. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, in today's video we're going to be going through some best practices and some helpful advice for both buying or selling on Facebook. And obviously the information is relative to pretty much all buying and selling, whether it's privately, through Facebook, eBay, all those kinds of things. But we're going to really focus more so on Facebook for this particular video. And obviously at the end of it, if you've got any comments or questions, feel free to let us know and we'll try and add them into future videos. So we're going to try and break this down into bite-sized chunks just to make it a little bit easier for you. So we're going to go through it one step at a time to give you a really good insight on how to do business online. So first of all, we're going to look at buying and selling in general. So some of the good practices that you may want to use if you're buying or selling online. First of one is know what you're selling or know what you're buying. If you're a seller, make sure you know what your product is, model numbers, specifications, all those kinds of things, and have a really good idea of how much the item is actually worth or how much you actually want for the item. And the same goes for a buyer. If you're buying an item, make sure you know what the item is actually really worth or what it's worth to you. Obviously, as in most things in life, things are only worth as much as someone's prepared to pay for it. So first of all, some things to take into consideration. First of all is obviously visuals. So a photograph can tell 1,000 words or something like that. So make sure that you take really good pictures. Now, if you're taking pictures, try and take pictures from all different angles of whatever it is you're selling to show up any highlights or actually any defects. Those are always worth mentioning up front just so that it doesn't come back to bite you in the end. Make sure the photos are nice and clear, crisp, in focus and preferably well lit so that everybody knows exactly what they're getting. Also try and take pictures of things like any additional packaging the product may have. If you can with the pictures, also get a piece of paper or something or today's newspaper and put that by the side of it, ideally with your username on the particular service you're using or some kind of personal identification so that somebody knows that the picture is genuine, you've taken the picture and everything is above board. Definitely something to avoid is generic photos. So if you're taking a photo or copy and pasting it from the original purchase or something like that, try and avoid those. A new fresh picture with a date and timestamp on there is actually much better and makes things a lot easier to sell. And in fact, some user groups actually do request that that is part of the selling process, that you actually put your details on a piece of paper in the picture. So that's the product out of the way. The next thing to do is to actually look at the seller or the buyer. Now, quite often on Facebook and things like that, you can actually see somebody's profile. So check out the buyer or the seller, see what they're about, see what other items they're listing. If you can, check them out on other social media. If you've got any hesitation about the person, whether they're kind of maybe a little bit dodgy or something like that, definitely do spend that extra time and use a little bit of due diligence and check out the person you're buying or selling from. Also, if you are using Facebook, there is actually a seller rating system, which you can always check out as well, just to validate or verify what you think about this person. So if you're happy with the person, the buyer or the seller, then it's a good idea to actually start asking some questions. Now, first of all, a really sensible question is this item still available? Quite often people will leave things for sale on Facebook Marketplace and not mark them as sold, so you'll keep on asking if it's available and the product's already been sold a long time ago. So that's a really good one to ask straight away. Also, you can ask really important questions like, is there any defects with the product? Any known problems? Now, certainly in the UK, there are laws that state that if you ask a deliberate outright question, I think this is more for motor vehicle sales, but it applies pretty much most places, ask if there's any defects. So they are liable or required to actually let you know if there's any defects if you specifically ask for them. And whilst you're at it, you can also ask if there's any discounts available, or if you're a seller, then you can offer any additional purchases to make a combined purchase. Either way, your quid's in. And talking of pricing, it's always a good idea to research your product. Have a look at other online sellers such as eBay and things like that, maybe the local Trade It or Gumtree, something along those lines, Craigslist, whatever it may be, and look at other items which are similar and see what kind of prices they're actually going for. eBay has a tool for sold items where you can go in and you can check the listings for sold items and see what prices items have actually sold for. This can make it a lot easier to work out what an item is actually worth and what it should be bought for. At the same time, it's a really good idea at this time If an item seems really underpriced for the current market value, then do be extra vigilant. Check out any defects in the pictures, take closer looks at it, and even ask the seller, why are you selling it this cheap? Sometimes they'll have a genuine reason for it, i.e. they're leaving the country or they no longer need it, it's taking up space, that kind of thing. But do be wary, sometimes people will use these things as kind of payday loans. So they'll sell you the item, get the money for it, and then it'll be a hassle actually getting the item, and eventually they'll refund it once they've been paid at the end of the month. This is a very common thing on eBay. So the next thing to do, once you've asked all your questions and you've come to some sort of agreement in your mind what you actually want to pay for this item, it's a really good idea to start taking some screenshots. Using your camera or your computer, take screenshots of the actual item, the listing, the details, and any conversation you've had with the buyer or seller. This is really super useful for things like serial numbers and also for validating any kind of errors or omissions after the sale. Say for instance you've bought something and they've said yes, it's all working absolutely fine, you've got that on a screenshot, and then it turns out that there is obvious problems with it. You can then go back to them and say, look, this is what you said it's working fine, clearly it isn't, and I've got it in writing. So that can always help should there be any problems further down the line. It's also really good practice as a seller to always try and make sure, if at all possible, take pictures of either barcodes or serial numbers. So that way, if someone's trying to buy a product and then try and return another product which is similar but not the same, you can validate it by checking the serial numbers against what you've sold, and then you have some visual proof of what you've sold as well. Clearly with serial numbers, registration details, all those kinds of things. So the next section is, now we're pretty much on the way to buying this item, make arrangements to actually meet up or to have the item delivered or whatever it may be. Now, common practice for this, eBay actually, and also Facebook for that matter, generally recommend not going to the seller's house to actually buy an item, which in some cases can't be avoided. Say for instance you're buying a car or a larger item, quite often people don't want to transport that kind of stuff around, so they'd rather you come to them. And that generally is the way most sales work. Now, if you are going to someone's house to collect an item, obviously do some research as well. See where the area is, or alternatively, look for a suitable local place where you can both meet, which will be mutually advantageous. Obviously, if you meet in a local place where there's public around, then obviously it's a little bit safer. You don't want to go to someone's house in the middle of nowhere, and it could be quite intimidating and could actually force you into buying something you necessarily wouldn't want, but because of where you are, you feel slightly intimidated. So ideally, if you can, take somebody along with you, a friend or something, and definitely if you're going alone, make sure that you tell somebody where you're going, what time you're going, give them a good idea of when you're likely to be back. So should anything untoward happen, at least somebody knows where you've gone, where you've been, and where you're likely to be. Now, it probably goes without saying that ideally, if you do meet somebody, you want to do it during daylight hours, both for safety for yourself and also so you can check out the product. In daylight, it's a lot easier to see any defects, especially if you're buying computer components. Under certain incandescent lights, it's not always easy to see any damage, and especially with things like cars or vehicles, in daylight things show up a lot easier than what they would during twilight or dusk hours. So the next part of this is to check out the goods. Now, it's always a good idea to check the goods work. It's common sense really, but some people still don't do it. They just take a box from the person, hand over the money and walk away thinking they've got themselves a bargain. So ideally, always check the item, make sure it is as the listing intended. If it's an electrical component, ask the seller to plug it in or to power it up to make sure it all works. Things like mobile phones, those kind of devices, ideally if you can, take a SIM card, a spare SIM card, and put it in the phone to make sure it works, make a call, all those kinds of things, make sure you can get on the internet, anything like that which can be helpful. Test, test, test. Now, if a buyer is unwilling to let you test a product, or a seller is unwilling to let you test a product, then definitely the alarm bell should be ringing. If a seller doesn't want to do it, or the item's boxed up and they say, oh, I don't want to get it out of the box, it's all boxed up, then walk away from the deal. If they won't let you test it, there's potentially something wrong with it and this could end up costing you money. Now, ideally, if you can do, if the seller will actually come to you, say for instance, it's a component for a computer, for instance, ask if the seller will actually come to you and if they will allow you to test the product in the convenience of your own home. This quite often works for me personally. If I'm buying a graphics card, I'll ask somebody to come and bring it to me. I'll test it in the machine, run 3D Mark or something like that, some kind of bench test, make sure it's all working as intended, and then you can feel happy about handing over the money. So once we're all happy with the product and it's all working, now is time to make a payment. So ideally with a payment, you don't want to be using cash if you can avoid it. Cash is handy, but unfortunately it's untraceable and it's very difficult to get back from someone if should anything go wrong. So ideally, you can use PayPal, use the goods and services, in which case you're protected by PayPal to some extent. Again, do look into the terms and conditions of that just to make sure that you are actually covered. For some users, if you're buying from a shop or some kind of retail outlet, then obviously you can use your credit card or debit card. Again, you have some element of protection with that. If you can't do that for some reason, there are certain third-party escrow services where you can actually give your money to a third party, and if this is in agreement with the buyer or seller, once everything's okay and everyone ticks a box, then the money gets transferred to the appropriate account. This is often used in house buying, that kind of thing, but there's no reason why you can't do the same thing for smaller purchases. Also, in some regions, Facebook does offer a buyer protection scheme or seller protection scheme known as the marketplace protection. This isn't appropriate for all countries, but do certainly look into it, just in case it may be very helpful for you to look into it. Okay, so there you go. There are some helpful hints and tips on how to buy and sell items, either be it directly to a public or through eBay or Facebook, those kinds of things. Now, there are some certain good practices as well that you can take into account with this kind of thing. One of the first is don't be rushed. Now, whether you're the buyer or the seller, this is appropriate either way. If someone's trying to rush you into a sale, there's possibly a reason for it. Certainly, they may be up against the clock and they need to be somewhere else, but a good buyer or a good seller will let you take your time, view the product, ask questions, and go through the motions of a sale. If you're being rushed, generally it's a good idea to walk away from the sale. Another good thing to do is just to keep calm. Don't be rushed, don't get panicked. Feel free to get into a disagreement with the buyer or seller. It's certainly better to do it now before you've handed over the money or before you've walked away from the deal. So my advice is just keep calm, don't rush in, take your time, make sure that you're happy, make sure that everything is above board, and make sure you've got what you actually wanted. So that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you've got any other questions or comments, or you've got any good tips or hints for buying and selling, then please do let us know in the comments section below. And if we get a certain number of them, then maybe we'll do this video again and add in your details. So I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.